devices, quite often BYOD. We're integrated in with Sentinel, we're integrated in with Defender. So, but there is a place where some people are like, well, should I just use Defender for mobile or should I use a full MTD, right? So the, Kern, again, being objective, where does Defender for mobile fit? Like, what does it detect and what does it not detect? And what sort of integrations or even, risk capabilities might be lacking compared to a full MTD? Because even Gartner doesn't recognize it as a full MTD. So that's not a diss. It's just a difference in terms of what's going on.
Yeah, I think the feedback that we're continuing to get from the field kind of consists of a couple of things. One is agnostic integrations. While Office 365 has candidly taken over the world, and justifiably so. I mean, it's a central platform, especially for productivity and utility. How organizations enable it within different areas kind of varies, right? Even though Intune is fairly prevalent, you still have organizations that may enable O365 but use a third-party MDM as an example. So, Defender works well within the Microsoft ecosystem, but once you get outside of that, there's some very distinct limitations. So, kind of the difference between a heterogeneous architecture versus a homogeneous architecture becomes a consideration that a lot of organizations come into play. But other areas kind of include, coverage across all those threat vectors that we talked about, device network application phishing, and especially, zero-day coverage as well that goes into play. I would encourage any customer to test, solutions and kind of stack up, hey, what is the detections, what's kind of the proven track record, where the forensics across the board and depth and breadth that goes into play. Because not everything is created equal, and while everybody should be able to do a basic jailbreak check as an example, how do you handle it with new versions of Magisk or some of the new hiding mechanisms that are out there, much less things like Pegasus and the forensics that come around it. But then you get into not just can you detect for phishing, but how do you detect for it? Because again, the use cases become varied. One common thing that I think everybody uses is a VPN-based approach for phishing, which is great. It gives you automated capabilities. But what about those use cases where a VPN can't be substantiated on a device, right? For a variety of reasons. Could be if it's per app VPN, the app may not be used. What if it's a BYOD device? You may not have rights to put a VPN on the device in the first place. So, the operational controls of on-demand capabilities, et cetera, come into play. And then just, bigger picture kind of risk analysis capabilities. There's aspects of that come into play. You alluded to it earlier, JT, but, I think a lot of customers are saying, hey, it's not just is an app malicious or not, but what's the relative risk of the application? I get that flashlight app may be legitimate, but I kind of want to understand if it has access to the microphone, calendars, contacts, et cetera. Or let me take a look at all the apps in my ecosystem. And even though they're not technically malicious, I do want to identify apps that have full device VPN capabilities, may have some weaknesses in SSL ciphers or communications, and oh, by the way, are connecting to servers in China, as an example. So that type of, more granular risk, I think organizations are finding value out of. So, it's don't get me wrong, it's a good start, it's a good solution, right? And I think it kind of justifies visibility into MTD, but the feedback that we get from customers around when they're looking at securely enabling their workforces, there's a bit more to it beyond some of the baseline detections that exist out there.
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point, and I'm just thinking back on, Andrew, you've had some great comments over here in the chat side of things. One of it is the this cyber mesh from Gartner. Just so happens that the analyst that's driving the majority of the cyber mesh is the lead analyst for mobile threat defense. He also happens to be a guy that used to work at Microsoft, a guy named Patrick Hevesy. And if anybody's interested in guys that really understand the tech and wants to look at it, Patrick's great on that side of things. And I was thinking about the Gartner Security Summit that we did last year, and I hosted a panel with JP Morgan Chase, Danaher, Medtronic, and TikTok and the gent from TikTok was originally from HSBC. And HSBC and Danaher have both gone and implemented O365, and they were they're customers of ours because they wanted a full MTD suite against all the zero-day threats and the like. The other thing is when we're talking about, Andrew had asked a question about the on-device component, the advantages of on-device, which I'll come back to here in a quick second. But the O365, the reason the bigger guys went with it, one of the things I think is interesting is, as I understand it, there's probably single-digit percentage of users are all the way up in the E5 licenses where you start to get into Defender. I could be wrong with that, but I do think it's interesting that our biggest customers for O365 protection are all the guys that already have E5. So I think that's kind of interesting myself. But on the on-device piece, real quick, you're right, Andrew. There's huge advantages, and here's 3 big advantages of doing your detection on device. First one is this: the dumbest thing about smartphones is the phone introduces itself to the network, not the other way around, right? It's just got a note. It's a lot higher than single digits. Okay, it'd be good to know, Nick. But the phone introduces itself to the network, not the other way around. So if the bad guy owns the network, all they have to do is the phone will say, "Hey, are you Starbucks?" And the network will go, "Well, yes, I am," and the phone will connect. So if the bad guy owns the network, he decides where you go and he decides where you don't go. The first thing he does is he cuts off access to cloud-based detection that's going to cause a problem. So we can defend ourselves when the bad guy owns the network. That's advantage number 1 of on-device. Advantage number 2 is we don't have to lock our management console into a particular cloud. The other major competitors in this market are all AWS in terms of full MTD solutions. We are native on Azure. We're native on other clouds, which we don't need to talk about since you guys are all Microsoft types. We also can be on-prem if people are doing it. And then, as Kern talked about, we're also the most privacy-centric solution. We don't have to take any data off the device if we don't want to. So one of the corporate social responsibility things that we've been doing is we actually power solutions that are branded by major cities and states that are provided for free to their citizens, which is the same industrial strength product that we've got that's defending Department of Defense and JPMC and Danaher and all those guys without a single piece of data ever leaving the device, because they didn't want to put an offering out there and then have it be where it looked like Big Brother was looking. So New York secure, NYC secure, Michigan secure, LA secure. We have some more coming out. So yeah, those are the advantages on that side. So, Kern, what I think, was there a question? Did you, I noticed it said there was a question here. And I don't know how Teams work. Andrew, does that mean you want to hop off, mute and ask a question?
Yeah, I would love to. Less of a question, more of a kind of comment. I mean, that whatever you guys presented, very valuable. I mean, it just kind of brought a couple of things for me into focus. I mean, one thing that I got to note for myself is like, well managed doesn't necessarily mean well secured, right? I think the well managed is kind of a prerequisite, right? And the size of that layer may differ. On GFE, you may do one thing, on BYOD, you may do another, but some level of management is necessary. But it may not, or may or may not equal well secured. So it's not. It may be a prerequisite, but it's not a complete solution. And I really loved what you were talking about, like on-device detection. I do think it's a huge deal, as like that comment from Gartner or whatever. I think it's true. We try to bring, for various reasons, costs kind of, it's more targeted. We try to bring security controls as close to the assets we're trying to protect as possible. But I think the inverse is also true. We want to bring the detection as far as possible, right? Because we want to detect, the potential threats as far away from the assets you're trying to compromise. Because typically there are more layers in between in like defense in depth scenarios. So if we detect it far, if we detect it early, there are more opportunities to stop something nefarious that may potentially happen. So I think that the fact that you guys do this like on-device detection is kind of a huge deal. And also, I mean, there are lots of kind of cloud solutions, I guess, that also, kind of, do that maybe in the cloud. But, I mean, it's like sometimes device may be in a like badly connected mode or something, that communication may be, limited in, whatever way. But if you're doing it all on device, then I think it's a huge advantage. So thank you for mentioning that. I'm certainly impressed.
Oh, appreciate that. Thank you very much. That was perfect. Well said. Kern, how about if we, because we're kind of rolling along here, we've been talking about this. Would you mind pulling up the console and let's just show some of the, that it's not a full product demo, but we can show some of the stuff we've been talking about so it can sink into people's head without us using PowerPoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you see my screen right now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Just want to make sure I have the right screen on, the right screen showing. So, generally when we talk with our customers, part of it, as we talked about, visibility into risk and threats. So where a lot of them start off with is, what's on the device? Where is my risk elements at? And there's a variety of areas that we have in that, be it from a risk management perspective, patch management, OS distribution, things like, hey, what are the exposures that exist out there? Which devices can I take action on that are upgradable? Other areas such as the app inventories that I have out there, which ones are legitimate, but also what's the relative privacy and security risk irrespective of legitimate or malicious apps, and then detailed reporting on them from technical reports, PDF reports, looking at previous versions of an app, et cetera. But once we get beyond that, we really want to get into how do we get this operational across the board? And this is where our ability to integrate within that larger ecosystem, especially within the Microsoft ecosystem, but also other ecosystems or both, becomes essential. So for example, if I wanted to integrate with with Microsoft, well, I can choose, is it in GCC, is it in the public cloud, et cetera. And then from there, I can define how I wish to integrate with it. So I can do support MDM and MAM use cases, or do I want to do third-party MDM plus Microsoft MAM? Again, that difference between a homogeneous and a heterogeneous environment becomes essential. What I can then start doing is working with the Microsoft environment to set up a couple of different areas. So within Microsoft and Microsoft Endpoint Manager, there's areas around the mobile threat defense connector that I can say, hey, I want to use this to collect different inventories, enable app syncs, but also evaluate different policies, be it app protection policies, et cetera. So as a administrator, I can go ahead and say, well, look, let me set up an app protection policy that says if you're trying to access certain applications like Outlook, Teams, et cetera, we may want to enable different management items on that. So, hey, do I want to prevent backups? What is the links that I want to exempt? What are the different items that I want to put in play as far as copy paste, DLP controls, et cetera? Those are kind of the management capabilities of that container. You can also do the same thing on the device if you wanted to. But you also have those conditional launch and conditional access controls that are around, well, what's the setting with either native jailbreak or root checks, but also what's the max allowed threat that I want to evolve through MTD as well, right? And this is where the rubber meets the road. So when we start talking about rollout and operations, well, as a user, if I go ahead and say install Outlook on the device, and this could be a managed or unmanaged device, and they set it up using Authenticator or any other mechanisms, the organization is now going to be able to protect and manage that application. But as part of that, that application protection policy is pushed down to the device, and seamlessly, the user is asked to install and activate the Zimperium app because we are the connector within this in this particular setup. So this is kind of a MAM workflow with the device's MDM managed. We can actually do this in a zero touch manner where the user doesn't have to interact with anything. But essentially, they go ahead and download the Zips app. They go access Outlook again. It says, great, you downloaded it. Go ahead and activate it. They activate it. We feed into the Authenticator workflow. That then activates things. The app is activated. The device is now protected. We're at a good threat level. And then the user goes ahead, accesses Outlook again. We say, hey, this app is good. They set a PIN because that's part of the application protection policy that they put in play. And the user is off on their merry way. So now the device is protected and we have Zips activated on said device. Now, if a threat occurs, and again, this is based on those app protection policies that are in play, we can dynamically respond and defend against the threat. So in this case, what happens is the user is on a safe device, relatively low risk, et cetera. They can access Outlook just fine. Well, if they go off and, let's say, for example, unknowingly connect to a network that has some malicious behavior on it, in this case, it's an unsecured network, but also happens to trigger one of our rogue access point detections. Well, it's now at a critical threat level. And again, all this can be customized however you wish. So when the user tries to go and access the Outlook app at this point, their app access is blocked because they're at a high risk level. So if they go at what they then are prompted to do is, hey, follow the commands of Zimperium, or it could auto remediate it. They get off the network, get onto a safe network, go back in, they open up the Zips app, and they open up the Outlook app, and they're allowed back into Outlook and access their email. So again, those differences between conditional launch and conditional access to ensure the device is at a safe and protected area. And then finally, all those threats that show up eventually end up in our environment, where we get the detailed reporting around the threat, around the different forensics. And oh, by the way, especially within the Microsoft ecosystem, it's not just the integrations into O365 and Intune, it's also into the other areas, be it Defender or Sentinel for the threat data feeds, or other third-party systems as well. So all that data can be ingested and provided to the larger ecosystem, to the larger environments, to enable SOC workflows, IR teams, anti-fraud, et cetera, that goes into play. So it's all about how we can seamlessly enable those users and those use cases, how we can securely enable it without over managing the device or over managing the user, but also automate those responses through smart policies, gain immediate visibility into the risk and threat posture of those devices, get the detailed forensics, and then be able to feed it into the larger ecosystem for maximum value for our users and for our customers. So I'll kind of stop right there. Any questions, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, it looks like we have one question, but before we hop over to that question, Kern, can you also just quickly show, I'm sorry, just while it was up, show the privacy tab?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because again, as we were talking about that being a critical component, having the flexibility to be able to create different privacy policies for your different users, whether it's BYOD versus not, maybe it's CCPA, just kind of showing that, I think is important.
Absolutely. Yeah, and all of these can be customized as well. So it just depends on what type of data you want to go or not go. And we tie these into those Active Directory groups that we're syncing through, in this case, Intune, but also other groups as well. So it's not just a catch-all for everybody. It's also group-based management capability as well. Because again, our detections exist on device. That gives us a lot of flexibility when it comes down to what type of data do you or do you not want to collect from the device as part of that forensic payload.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So it looks like we have a question from Chris. Is that right?
Yeah, Christopher, but either way, close enough.
Thanks, Christopher. Thank you.
So when you talk about integration with Sentinel and Intune,
Mhm.
is there a difference in functionality, whether it be in commercial, GCC, GCC high? Do you see any difference in feature sets?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for Sentinel, not really. As long as we can make the connection, we're good. And we actually, interestingly enough, we've actually deployed this very Zimperium console into GCC high environments. So it's not just integrations on the I'll call it, sorry, I keep calling it Intune. I know it's Microsoft Endpoint Manager now, but it's also our console can be hosted in Azure. So we actually can be deployed in GCC high as well. From the Intune side, or the Microsoft Endpoint Manager side, we integrate with Endpoint Manager that's hosted in GCC high to the level that capabilities are available at that point. The one thing that, to my knowledge, and I don't know if this has changed recently, we can work with the MDM managed devices, but I don't believe that the app protection capability is available in Endpoint Manager if it's in the GCC high environment. But I'm very happy to be proven wrong, to be honest with you, because that would be great if it was available. But basically we integrate with Microsoft in all the environment in all those areas to the level that the API sets are available for us to integrate with.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to raise your hand. Matthew, I'm going to go with Matthew until I'm told Matt. Sorry, Christopher. So Matthew.
No, thank you. JT, like you mentioned earlier, what you guys have in some ways a little bit of a competitor with what is with Microsoft and Office 365, somewhat complementary, a little bit of a Venn diagram where there's some overlap there. I am just getting underway with discovery work on a new project with a customer, and they're saying, yeah, we need your help with configuring some things with security in Office 365. We're looking at, and this is what they mentioned today, literally today, Defender versus Zimperium and making decisions there. And so how do I walk them through, the conversation of pros and cons, or maybe there is in their mind, and maybe there is a value in saying it's gonna have to be one or the other, or is it more of a harmony there that they need to come to understanding with the capabilities of both?
Yeah, Kern, do you want to take a first shot at that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a harmony on it, right? And a lot of it's going to be driven on what they're going to prioritize in their use cases. One of the points I would make is that we don't operate on PCs, so automatically Defender has its place on Windows PCs and some of the other we term it legacy endpoints. I know it's a little bit biased, but non-mobile endpoints, right? And the benefit is that we all feed our threat forensics into the same area. So from a SOC or IR perspective, and even the conditional access enforcements, we're all using the same mechanisms for it. So there's not really a difference per se. I think I would encourage any customer to, test and understand kind of what is the priority and stack the two, any two solutions. And this isn't just as Zimperium or Defender. This could be, Workspace ONE and Intune. It could be, BlackBerry and mobile and Avanti, right? Symantec McAfee, for lack of a better term. I would always recommend kind of, hey, let's prioritize and let's bring it in and understand what are the capabilities and what's a good fit from there. I think in general what we find is once we kind of get into a conversation with customers, there's a lot of great and mutual opportunities where we can really help enable Office 365 and the larger Microsoft ecosystem while also ensuring that the customer's needs are met in a manner that has been proven and gives them great results across the board. And that's where we really fit very easily into that Microsoft ecosystem, along with the integrations and deployment, being deployed in Azure, integrate not just with Endpoint Manager, but with Defender, with Sentinel, with all those things, so that there's a very harmonious ecosystem that can be created.
Yeah, and Matthew, if you want, you can shoot us an email, and we're happy to hop on the phone with you and just kind of explain what are some of the questions you have to consider. And so, for instance, is it only Office 365 that they care about, or are there other productivity apps that are on the device? Is it a completely heterogeneous endpoint manager, or like a lot of our customers, they might be on AirWatch, which is where Kern came from, which is VMware. They might have managed devices there and unmanaged devices in endpoint manager, combinations of things that sometimes help dictate some things. So if it helps any, we're more than happy to sit down from having done lots of these and kind of chat with you about it if it helps.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Any other questions, anybody? And thank you guys very much for your conversations in the chat. For those folks that are interested in potentially learning a little bit more, I would say probably the best thing to do is just shoot an email to info@zimperium.com. That gets flagged pretty quickly. Of course, it's the SDR attack team, but then they quickly realize, okay, this isn't an end customer, and they'll pass it off to us. And if you put that email in, you can literally just say, hey, I'd like to follow up on the conversation with JT and Kern. That'll bring us to our attention and we can engage with you guys. But that's probably the safest way to kind of come in. But other than that, hey, we'd like to thank everybody. Thank you guys very much for hosting us. hopefully it was at least somewhat entertaining. And again, we apologize for not throwing up slide after slide after slide. And I laughed about the death by PowerPoint that was put in there earlier. But thank you guys very much for hosting us, and we'll turn it back over to our actual hosts. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. JC and Kern, great job. I personally learned a lot just from hearing you talk, and really appreciate some of the background and information you guys shared, and also how your guys' product really can help customers who are trying to manage the threats that they have on mobile further. So for anyone else, thank you for attending this evening. I'm going to end the recording here. But anyone who wants to stick around and chat after the session, feel free.